Good morning, everybody. So we're getting ready to start some planning for our midterms because they're going to be here in a couple of weeks. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be starting to look at creating and telling stories with our photographs. So we'll refer to that generally as a narrative. And so we're going to look at a couple of approaches today during class. And once we look at that, then we want to start to do some of the actual planning for what our shoot is, right? If we think of habits of mind, this is going to kind of take care of two things. One is metacognition, right? Thinking about our thinking. We want to really reflect on what it is that we want to try to tell and say in our photograph. And then the other part is also just kind of the managing impulsivity, right? We don't want to just jump in and try to shoot something and then hope that it turns out. We want to think ahead and we want to plan and we want to come up with ideas and work out all of those parts before we go and start actually clicking the shutter. So this will help us kind of do some of that organization. So we'll start with some origami with Mr. Sally. So let's go ahead and jump in here. You're just gonna need a regular sheet of white paper, just 8.5 by 11. And what we're gonna start with is we're just gonna make a top fold like we've often done. So I'm just gonna make it, and I'm gonna do it a little bit longer, maybe a couple of inches. So it's kind of almost a third, but maybe not quite, but around here. There we go. And so that's our first fold. Then we're gonna go ahead and flip it over so we don't see that line. And then what we wanna do is we're gonna basically fold it into thirds. And again, this doesn't have to be perfect, but we're gonna go ahead and bring this over to about a third. And then this one as well. And what that should do is leave, a little small gap here. It doesn't need to be very big. There we go. So now that we have those, we're going to basically do a corner fold. So we're going to fold from this top corner all the way down to this edge here. So again. There we go. And then we want to do the same thing with the other one. So if it's easiest, just kind of open that up. And then again, from this top corner here all the way down to that bottom corner. Go. Now that we've got those two parts folded out, you're going to go ahead and flip it over. There we go. And then we've got just a couple of simple folds here. So we're going to create basically two dog ears, kind of like what we do in our vocabulary. So we're just going to take this corner here. And then this corner here. We're just folding it back. There we go. So just like so. And then we're going to take these two parts and we're going to make them kind of squared off. So just like looking along this edge, just find a part. We want a little part that hangs out off to the side like a little flap. And then we'll just fold those back. So there we go. That's our origami. And just to give it some context, let's just maybe put a little quickly. So hopefully it's becoming slightly apparent what it was that we were creating here. I'll just color those in quickly just for some contrast. Now we've created an origami R2D2. So that's our basic fold. And again, we do the origami really as a way of creating structure for some of our planning. So there's our origami. Take a picture of it, put it on your website. And then let's go ahead and open that up and see what kind of areas we've got for structure. So for our planning page, let's go ahead and just define some areas. So I'm just going to start with, these diamonds here, kind of like with our vocabulary. And there's really two main things we want to talk about in this project. So the first thing that we want to look at is storytelling. And of course, take your time. You can always, write a little nicer. And then the other part that we're curious about is like our, let's just call it shooting techniques. Because since this is our midterm, we want to kind of do two things. We want to both demonstrate that we understand some of the things, the concepts that we've gone over, kind of like what we did with movement, but now we've got even more techniques. And then the other part is this incorporation of some sort of a story. So that's kind of our main area. Let's see if I have a color. Well, maybe this will at least give it a little color. And so we're going to split it into kind of three main areas. So I'm just going to divide this. So let's go with that and maybe over to here. So that way, this whole section over here, so basically we've got thirds, right? So everything on this side is going to be dealing with these storytelling or the shooting part. And then everything on this other side, I don't have great colors with me, but everything on this side over here is going to be dealing with storytelling. So just so we have kind of like a visual for those kind of sections. So we've kind of made it into thirds. So then what we want to do is, you're going to be thinking about some ideas. So let's start with storytelling. So if we want to think about storytelling, we want to start to think about, what is some inspiration? We don't have to invent everything from scratch. So there's a couple of options that we could do. Let's just take a look. Let's use this whole top section up here. And, growing up, we all, either read stories or were exposed to movies, those sort of things. And so let's think about fairy tales. So let's use this whole top section here, to deal with fairy tales. So just come up with a couple of ideas of different fairy tales that maybe you read as a child or that were important to you or that maybe has some great storytelling potential that maybe we can take and maybe do in a modern way as opposed to just like doing it the way that it was in the Disney movie or whatever it was. And then we're going to take this section down here, we're going to divide it, and this top part, let's go ahead and do fall poems, because you might be that you're not inspired by the fairy tales and you might want to do something with fall poems. And it's that time of the year, we're heading towards Halloween. And it might be that you love nature and you like to hike or you like to backpack, and so maybe you're inspired by, maybe it's a Emerson poem, or you love the work of, maybe a story by John Muir or something like that. So it could be a poem, it could be a naturalist, it could be something. You may have to do a little research on that one, just look for some things just so you have a part of that for inspiration. And then the final one I want you to think about is scary stories. So this could be from movies, from books, things that you've read. It could be little short camp stories, those sort of things. But come up with some ideas for each of these to kind of fill in some of those possibilities of the story that we might tell. Then in our shooting techniques, we're going to be looking at basically three components to our shooting. So the first thing that we want to think about is lighting, right? We just have recently been talking about lighting. So again, when you're starting to think about lighting, what I'd like you to do is, narrow down from this storytelling a couple of ideas that you think you might actually want to do. What really inspires you? What is something that you want to try? And then when you're thinking of that, so let's say, for example, I was going to do something about Little Red Riding Hood. If I wanted to, now when I'm thinking about the lighting, how do I want to light that, right? Is it the story that I'm telling the narrative about, like the wolf's perspective, or, is it about her going through the forest? Is she backlit? Does that make sense? Is it split lighting to maybe kind of show the two sides, or, whatever it is? So when you start to think about what is your narrative or your story going to be, then start to think, how could the lighting of that also help tell the story of it, right? How's it going to enforce it as opposed to being arbitrary, right? We want to, since we're planning and we're trying to be conscious of these things, we want to think about how is it going to actually enforce and enhance our story. So we want to think about lighting techniques. The other things we want to think about are camera techniques, right? Because, in that example, I might want, maybe it's a motion blur that's going through there, and, the forest is still and she's running through the woods. or maybe it's a panning technique, or it could be shallowed up the field and it's just a great portrait of the girl kind of dressed as Red Riding Hood, and we're getting in close and the background's blurry, or all of those techniques that we've been learning, we're now looking at how we can apply those to help, again, tell or push forward our narrative and support the idea that we have. So when we think of camera techniques, come up with a couple ideas, and again, about how that's going to support your story that you want to tell. Then the last one's composition. And again, with composition, we've now picked up a few more techniques. Maybe as I'm incorporating, a bird's eye view and we're looking down and she's running through the forest, or maybe we're utilizing from below, or we're looking at above to make the wolf seem bigger, or, maybe we're doing something like a juxtaposition. Maybe it's, that we're doing Red Riding Hood, but she's in the city and not in the forest, and we're creating juxtaposition with that, or, whatever it is, right? So we've got these new techniques. We can still use rule of thirds, but try to think of some of the other parts of point of view that we could use that'll also, again, help enforce those parts. Incorporated with camera technique too, you've also got things like focal length, right? Am I doing something more wide angle, or do I want it more telephoto, or can I use like the flow filter or something like that? All of these things that you now have as tools, you can start to utilize. And again, the idea is to take those things that we're learning and apply it to this new thing of telling the story. And we're going to look at kind of two ways of telling the story, in a single image and also in sequences. So as you fill this out and you start to come up with your ideas, once you have that, then you're going to go ahead and go into Flipgrid and explain to me what your idea is for your project. So I'm going to give you guys a little extra time so you have time to think and plan for that. But by the end of the weekend, I want you to have come up with your idea, and that'll give you almost 2 weeks to get it shot and completed so that it can be turned in for our time of final. So you've got time to plan and start going on it. So as soon as you have that, then go into the Flipgrid. There'll be a new one for you so that you can go ahead and share those ideas, so that I understand how you're gonna approach doing your shooting assignment. If it's gonna be a single image, if it's gonna be a sequence, location, characters, what techniques you're planning on using, those sort of things, so that I have a good idea of what your game plan is. All right, so hopefully that helps, and I will see you guys soon.